not going to happen. So that being said, now with the fires that we're having, we know that all of that really changes. So kind of, I would say, you know, my take-home message for landowners in the Kirkwood area is know that species composition matters. Forest structure matters. If you're looking at something across your property line, like the pictures I just showed you, that should be a concern. Also know that stand density matters. So be aware kind of your surroundings. Be aware of the species that you're choosing to retain on your property. And just know that the best time spent, I would say definitely is in your defensible spacing. And I know that those of you from CAL FIRE are going to launch into this, so I'll keep this really short. But if you can do your best in that 0 to 5 feet and then extending outwards, whether your property line is at 100 feet or further than 100 feet, once you get out of your defensible space zone, just make sure that you are creating, you know, vertical and horizontal discontinuity of fuels. So you don't want fire to travel up vertically into the crowns, and you don't want fire to be able to travel horizontally either through the crown or along the ground. So it's really that discontinuity that we're trying to tackle. I think other than that, those are kind of the key points that I wanted to mention. I personally, I know I'm biased because I'm a forester, but I find it to be important that people know kind of some of the key species, you know, where they live and some of the growth requirements of them and some of the potential risks, like we've mentioned with lodgepole pine. You can be a little bit more informed when you're making those decisions regarding vegetation management on your own property and adjacent to and within your community. So with that, I will pass it on to the next presenter. Oh, Jessica, I think you're muted.
Hi, Jessica. Yeah, I was just going to say.
Thank you.
There you
go. So thanks, Danielle. That was great. So now we'd like to introduce Chief John Morgan, and he'll take it away. Chief, go for it.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to also introduce Chief Mike Boyce, who invited me here to talk to you about defensible space and other items, as it were. For those of you who may or may not have noticed, I put my contact information in the chat. If you don't see it there, then I can share it again, because sometimes, well, actually, why don't I just do that? Sometimes, if you share the information too early, folks who come in later don't see it. So anyways, that's my, well, of course, you spell my name with the J. It looks like I copied less the J, but I'm John Morgan with CAL FIRE. I'm the Deputy Chief of Wildfire Preparedness, and I'm headquartered out of Sacramento. Don't hold that against me. I was on a fire engine for 21 years and you know, did the real job for a long time, but have now transitioned later in my career into an administrative role where I get the opportunity to run the Defensible Space Program, the Home Hardening Program, the Burn Permit Program, and the Damage Inspection Program for the state. So today I wanted to kind of specifically talk about defensible space, since it is that time. However, you know, we say it's defensible space time, but really it's all year round, right? Defensible space is it's kind of like the speed limit. It's an at all times type of a law. But so I'll share my screen real quick for our, just to kind of point out some of our key items. In the chat, I placed a link to this website, so feel free to come here. This is our main CAL FIRE defensible space information website that's strictly dedicated to talking about defensible space. You'll also notice that we have our wildfire.org site, which is another great site that talks about much more than just defensible space, talking about evacuations and what to do and how to prepare and that type of thing. So it's our Ready, Set, Go site. But anyways, talking about defensible space, I just wanted to point out that we do have a lot of good information here as far as what defensible space is, along with some kind of heads up type information about a new zone that was brought about by Assembly Bill 3074 a couple of years ago. Now, in January of 2023, all across the state, there will be a new zone implemented. It's Zone 0, but many people call it the ember resistant zone. And what that entails is that first 5 feet extending from the side of your structure outward. And within that first 5 feet, as I scroll down here, just kind of talk about some of these things. Within that first 5 feet, it's currently a recommendation since this doesn't start until January. And I'll talk about January here in a second, but we recommend at this point that you use things like hardscape, gravel, pavers, things of that nature that are non-combustible within that first 5 feet. And the biggest reason why is what we're finding through research is that embers are cast at exceptional range out in front of a wildfire. We see this anywhere from inches in front of the wildfire out. I've had a 9-mile spot fire out in front of the fire. So it's important that we protect ourselves from that ember cast, just as it's important for us to protect our property from the actual flame front itself. So that's what Zone 0 is intended to assist with. Removing all the dead and dying weeds. We of course do that on a standard defensible space year, right? You're going to put in your 100 feet or so of defensible space, hopefully, or more, right? But this is even more dedicated to the removal of those things like fallen leaves, fallen needles, that vegetative matter that is building up on the ground. What we find is that during the fire, as the fire department personnel move through a community, they're looking for those large signs that a house is in trouble, right? We're looking for smoke, we're looking for fire, we're looking for something that is an indicator as we move through a neighborhood that, oh, we need to stop here and take care of a fire issue. But many times in that duff or combustible mulch, there are these small smoldering fires, and up in the eaves also, and the rain gutters that collect vegetative matter, and you get these small smoldering fires that may not be apparent to a fairly quickly moving fire department that is going through following the fire front. And so what we found is that many times we'll come back to a neighborhood 5, 6, maybe 10 hours later, and homes are burned down that weren't burned down before. So we started thinking, well, what in the world is causing this? We came through here, we cleared these structures. And what it came down through research was that it was those embers that were starting those very small smoldering fires that were unseen at first, and then later on with wind and fire activity and just simply time, those fires, those small smoldering fires, were able to build into a fire that could catch the structure and ultimately burn it down, and many times the structures around it as well. Which kind of brings me to another thing. The fuels we have near our structures, like wooden fences. It's very, very common to see wooden fences between property lines. And what we noticed was that these wooden fences end up acting sort of like a wick, and fire will just slowly carry along that wooden fence, burn up to the garage where the gate comes up next to the house, and it catches the house on fire. Well, the house burns down, and then it catches the fence on fire on the opposite side of the house, which of course is attached to the neighbor's house. So we would find 10 houses burned down in a neighborhood that was otherwise untouched. And it turned out it was because that wooden fence caught on fire and there was nothing separating it. So through this research we've done, we realized that 5 feet of separation is a very key distance to helping stop that fire progression in those types of situations, which is where we actually lose many of our structures. Defensible space, as you know, is a California state law, and then there are other local ordinances that may affect your particular property. So it's important to know and research that out with your local jurisdiction. On a statewide level, though, we have Zone 1, which is not really changing in the near future, other than the fact that we will have that 0 to 5 at the beginning. But it's that first, Zone 1 is that first 30 feet extending out from the structure. And that is that area where you really want to focus removal of that dead and dying, getting those wood piles and that type of stuff out of that zone. We find that wood piles that aren't protected within 30 feet of the home are often close enough to actually start the home on fire. They're also very receptive to embers and hold those smoldering fires almost just as well as combustible mulch like bark and leaves and needles and things like that. So very important to try and remove that wood pile out away from the house as far as you can. I know some of us live on lots that are much smaller than you know what typical defensible space allows, right? 100 feet can be a very large lot. And so we go to our property line, right? But I would also encourage you that when you're moving something like this to also think about where you're locating that pile of wood in relation to your neighbor's home or an outbuilding that might catch on fire and cause additional issues. And then, of course, we move out to Zone 2, which is that section from 30 feet from the structure on out to 100 feet or the property line, whichever's closer. And we're still reducing the fuel. We're still trying to set up that spacing. And as you scroll down this page, there is an area here for local ordinances. Now, it's not all inclusive of every single ordinance in California. However, it covers a lot of them. So I encourage you to take the link and see if your local ordinances are posted there so that you can get a feel for what your local jurisdiction also might require for defensible space and that type of thing. Now, we talked about plant spacing just a few minutes ago, and here on this site you have some handy dandy diagrams that can show you why and what and how to calculate. So basically, though, it's you're looking for space horizontally and vertically. So this one, talking about vertical spacing in particular, if you have a bush here, and it's we have an X for our measurement. So let's say that's a 5-foot bush, 5 feet tall. You're going to want 3 times that height from the top of the bush to the bottom branches of your trees. I know, and this is kind of a description or a depiction of what we get when we don't have that vertical spacing. You have a bush that catches on fire. It catches this tree on fire, which brings that, it's called ladder fuels, and it brings that fire up into the tops of the trees, and which becomes extremely difficult for the fire department to control. So this is the point of that spacing, is to keep that fire very low so that we can take care of that. We also have horizontal spacing recommendations, and they change when you look at different slopes around your home. So on flat ground, we recommend 10 feet spacing. On slopes between 20 and 40%, we recommend doubling that, and still greater spacing the steeper you go. So take that into consideration. We also talk about fire smart landscaping, but what I would encourage you to do is don't necessarily think about the species so much as you think about the characteristics of the plant. So good maintenance and regular maintenance goes a long way toward really reducing that fire danger from that defensible space. So really keep that in mind and take that to heart. It's those characteristics of your defensible space that make the biggest difference. I'm going to scroll quickly back up to the top of the page. Sorry for the quick scroll. Some of you may be aware that last year there was a new law, AB 38, that requires a defensible space inspection, or at least requires documentation of a compliant defensible space inspection in order to transfer title of a home. So in other words, you need to get that. The seller needs to get documentation of compliance with defensible space measures prior to the close of escrow. So this is where you would be able to request that documentation of compliance. We have multiple links set up here. The first one is to simply find out if you're in a high fire hazard severity zone, high or very high, moderate or none for that matter. But you can use that link to find that out. But I honestly just recommend just go ahead and use the link to schedule an inspection. Please use our defensible space inspection request form. And when you click on that, it'll take you to a form that you fill out with your owner information and perhaps your real estate agent's information. You choose your location, you put your address in, you sign the document and you hit submit. And that starts the process for requesting that type of an inspection. So this is where you would go to do that. Something else that I recommend for everyone also is our self-paced self-assessment. When you click on this link, it takes you to, and I'll just do it here for a second, but it takes you to another site. Anytime you click on any of these links, it tells you you're leaving our main site. And it's a survey that will allow you to go through your specific conditions at your house to find out how you stack up, how your home would stack up with defensible space, fire resistant and or fire smart landscaping, and also components of home hardening. So in order to do that, you would just click next and it'll take you through the process. When you're done, again, you hit submit and it will email a list of suggestions based on the criteria you enter. So be extremely honest with it because you're only evaluating yourself. This doesn't come to us. It's not used for any type of enforcement purposes. It's purely educational for the person who fills it out. It doesn't trigger an inspection. It doesn't trigger anything other than information for you. So try to be extremely honest on this so that you can get the best and most information out of it. Yeah, and so I mean I can go on, but that kind of covers the gist of it. Did you want to talk about anything else real quickly?
I believe that really covers everything I was under the impression that was kind of asked for, and I think really gives a lot of information to the homeowners. Again, these websites that are provided are just a wealth of information, and being able to come through and do these self-assessments prior to an inspection being scheduled really allows the homeowners to take care of a lot of those deficiencies prior to our personnel coming out and conducting the inspections, and I think a lot higher probability of just having a single inspection completed and passed.
Right, absolutely. One thing I did forget to mention is that the picture right there on that website will take you to our actual inspection form. You see it says sample LE100A, but there are also other links all throughout the website that that you can glean information from. And again, that sample LE100A, I'm going to click on the English one because that's my first language. It brings up the actual inspection form that CAL FIRE uses to evaluate your defensible space. So if you're curious what we would be looking at, this is it. This is literally what the inspection is done from. And so you can see step by step every single thing we would be looking for. And then of course, you would get the homeowner / defensible space inspector face-to-face contact and information sharing during the actual inspection. But this is truly the inspection form. And nicely, we put that spacing guidance on the back of that form. And this is right here on the public website for you to take advantage of so that you know what to expect.
That's great. Thank you so much. At this point, I'd like to open it up to any other panelists that would like to add anything. Chief Boyce. There's also CAL FIRE Representative Catherine Hopkins, if anybody, or Danielle, if you had anything else to add, feel free.
Yeah, let's see if Kathy had anything to add in as far as conducting the defensible space inspections and what the homeowners can expect and how that process works. Is that something you could cover, Kathy?
Yeah, so I'm Catherine Hopkins. I'm with AEU Defensible Space, and we will go out to your home, and we like to educate more than anything about defensible space and home hardening. In the chat, I'll leave our number that you can call if you want to schedule an appointment. But what we'll do is we'll discuss what was discussed today. And if you have any questions while we're out there, answer those for you. So, yeah.
Yes. So, you know, I was looking at the question and answer section, and I wondered, Mike, would you be able to address Sandy's question about open flames and fire pits, warming
just
fires,
taking a look at
cooking
that.
fires, things like that?
Okay, so the question was, are there any CAL FIRE restrictions that prohibit open flames, fire pit, warming fire in the Kirkwood area? So by CAL FIRE's regulation, we do have like a burning season during the winter where people could dispose of their vegetation, things like that. And then during what we consider like a declared fire season, when burning has been suspended, you are still under this within the state responsibility area. You are allowed to have what they consider warming, cooking, or ceremonial fires are permitted. That said, yeah, with any kind of fire, you are still responsible for that, whether it be a barbecue or anything else. There are local restrictions, especially within the Tahoe Basin, that specifically identify, things like charcoal barbecues and wood fires and things like that. I'm not sure about a local ordinance for Kirkwood, especially with the 3 counties kind of coming together like they do, and any specific ordinance for that. So again, it is legal, and then what you consider a warming fire again would be, a small like campfire type ring. But again, you are responsible and liable should that escape your control. So certainly something that needs to be really thought out prior to.
Great. Yeah. And I noticed that, thanks for bringing this up, Heidi, that I have been adding my comments to the panelists and hosts, which doesn't help you very much. And so, so I am going to copy and paste all of my information into the everyone group.
And
Hopefully
also, I
that
think,
helps.
yeah, the chat is disabled. I'm seeing also on the.
I tried to enable it when I saw Heidi's message.
Oh,
So hopefully, because I switched it to panelists can chat with everyone and attendees can chat with everyone. But if this doesn't work itself out, I can for sure send out links to the community when we're done with this, because I have all of them in the records here.
Okay, and yes, if we could
Yeah,
get
looks like,
Catherine Hopkins' contact information, I think that would be helpful.
awesome. So the next question was from Sandy, and it talked about Public Resources Code section 4291. I can talk about that all day long, and I'd be happy to. What specifically are you looking for there? And just to let you know, I posted a link to it in the chat. Hopefully it came through in the right one.
Yes, that one went to everybody, so that did go through. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Sandy's not a panelist, but I could
Okay.
I could speak for her from Sandy's one of the resident leaders of Firewise. I think what people still don't understand is that Public Resources Code 4291 is the law, and we are required to create defensible space. I think there's also a misunderstanding sometimes because we've had a tree ordinance that didn't allow us to even remove a single branch. And so there's been a lot of confusion that, in Kirkwood, we were supposed to encourage all the sapling growth and not remove any trees. So I'm guessing that could be, Sandy's question. So if you could maybe reinforce that it is the law, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so that we're all on the same page, I went ahead and brought it up here on the screen. Lots and lots of legal jargon here and all of that. But something I would really like to point out as I blow this up a little bit easier to see is that a person, and this is a law, like the speed limit, when we leave the house, we know we have to follow the speed limit, regardless of whether we see the speed limit sign. We can still be pulled over if we're exceeding the speed limit. So Public Resource Code 4291 is a very similar law in that it's required at all times of every California resident within certain areas. So we'll talk about that. So it's any person who owns, leases, controls, operates, or maintains a building or structure. And then it talks about where. In a mountainous, well, let's be more specific, adjoining or upon, right? Upon or adjoining a mountainous area, forest-covered land, shrub-covered lands, grass-covered lands, or land that is covered with flammable material. And then, like I mentioned, the end-all be-all statement is shall at all times do all of the following. And then it goes into what we talked about, which is all of these defensible space rules and regulations. And so you'll notice on the sheet, it talks about where this rule or regulation comes from. So this is Public Resource Code 4291. And you'll see that throughout the entire document as far as where this particular requirement comes from. So that's a really great question. I'm really glad you brought it up, because that's really the key there, is who and where and when is all covered in the very first paragraph of Public Resource Code 4291. Now, as far as local ordinances versus what you need to do for defensible space per the law, local ordinances, and I'm sure as you go through that ordinance that talks about not cutting down certain types of trees and branches and things like that, I can't tell you for sure because I haven't read your ordinance, but I bet there's a paragraph in there somewhere that states this is superseded or something to the effect of unless superseded by a governing law. So this is a state law that is, it cannot, this state law cannot be held back from a local ordinance if the local ordinance is holding the land to a lesser standard, right? So there's a fine balance in there that we have to strive to achieve. And, you know, we want to be very cognizant of environmental factors, protected species, things of that nature at all times as well. But at the end of the day, we also need to work with those local officials to make sure that we're achieving the best goal all around, and we're building in protection for not only your property, but yourselves, your own life, and the lives of the firefighters who are coming in to protect that property. So yes, it's a very weighted question and sometimes a big topic for debate. but at the end of the day, the local ordinance cannot hold back a state law. Going down the list of, the next question is, does wood chipping programs have negative impact on defensible space? And I would say that absolutely not. If we use the wood chips in the proper way, right? We can use wood chips for mulch outside of that, outside of zone 1, so 30 feet or more away from the house. I am all about wood chips, but no deeper than 3 inches deep. And that's just coming straight out of Public Resource Code 4291 and California Code of Regulations 1299.3. So you feel free to look that up, and you'll find all these measurements and depth and things like that. But wood chips, from a chipping program, it retains moisture. It helps curb the growth of tall weeds and annual grasses and things of that nature. Obviously, it gives back a ton of nutrients back into the ground and all of that. But having those wood chips up next to a building, up next to your house, is going to create a bed of receptive fuels for smoldering fires right next to your structure. And that is something that we definitely do not recommend. Use things like, if you need something permeable and a ground cover mulch that will help hold water, moisture, things like that, use pea gravel, use river rock and things of that nature where that water can still penetrate through that barrier and continue to retain that moisture, but it doesn't create a receptive fuel bed as long as it's maintained, right? We still have to blow those leaves out of there. We have to blow those needles out of there and get that organic matter off of those rocks just as well. Another question, let's see. We talked about the chat, got that. Also, will the LE 100 be revised in January? Absolutely. So thank you for bringing me back around on that question. So I mentioned before, January 1st, 2023, Zone 0 becomes law. But there's a big caveat here. 2023 is only for brand new construction. Say that again. Zone 0 applies to brand new construction in the year of 2023. Starting January 1st, 2024, it's all other houses dating back as far as they've been constructed. So keep that in mind. We still have about a year and a half before all of the existing construction will be held to the Zone 0 standard, and all new construction starts January 1st, 2023. Let's see. This next question from Pamela. Our home is in West Meadow. We have a certain shrub which is prolific. It grows 5 feet tall or so, is green and lush, branches up to 2 inches in diameter. It's really hard to get the root ball out, plus it surrounds our house. So like an aspen grove probably is all connected. Might it be less of a fire danger because it is green and moist? If not, what machines could dig this out in a way that it wouldn't come back in a year? Great question. So looking at bushes and shrubbery, what we've found is that you're absolutely right. When something holds a lot of moisture, it appears to be green and lush, oftentimes that is thought to be a plant that will almost slow a fire. But what we've found in research is that once that flame front reaches that plant, that we're looking at temperatures of thousands of degrees. You know, a cold fire is going to be running along at about 1,000 degrees, and if it's a good going fire, I know it's hard to say good in the same sentence as fire, but if it's going really robustly, we're looking at thousands of degrees. And so those green lush plants, they just dry right out and burn, especially the leaves of them. When you think about it, you look at that leaf and it's the green part of that plant, but oftentimes there's a lot of oil and resin in that leaf, and it dries out because it's so thin very quickly. So it dries out very quickly, and then it flashes, and many times you're left with just this skeleton of a plant. Like you mentioned, these stems grow up to 2 inches in diameter. Many times those stems won't be the biggest problem. It's all that leaf, the greenery on it, that actually flashes and burns and carries that fire through that landscape. So what we recommend there is you may not want to get rid of all of it. I definitely suggest you get rid of all of it within 5 feet of your home. And then outside of that, within Zone 1, island those types of plants, meaning you could have patches of them that are spaced according to our spacing regulations or recommendations, but don't allow them to grow continuously, because it's that continuous bed of fuel that brings that fire right into your yard and up to your house ultimately. As far as the machine goes, gosh, that's a great question, and probably a good question for an arborist or someone, a contractor who does that sort of work. But you may be looking at some type of mulching machine that might turn that stuff into the ground or whatnot. But that's a great question. Definitely pull those out away from the house, and if you're going to have them in Zone 1, island them and space them out from each other so that they don't carry fire to one another. So Sandy's question is explain what homeowners are allowed to do. That's a good local question because I think that goes toward the question we answered a little bit earlier regarding protected plants and protected species and that type of thing. So I would leave that one to the locals to answer. And then,
Sandy, what can you expand on that question a little bit if you have a chance? Just type it in.
another one from Sandy says, how one goes about thinning a grove of trees on one's property. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of tying back in there. So Sandy, what I am gathering from these questions, and anyone can jump in if you'd like to, but is your question that you want to know how you're able to thin a grove of trees on your property and still meet the intent of both local regulations and state regulations. And so I think that's a perfect dynamic for that in-person inspection, and having those local fire officials along with perhaps code enforcement officials for your town to be able to talk about and educate not only you but each other on these ordinances and state laws, so that those specific items like that can be worked out.
Danielle, I wonder if you might have any input on the shrub that was being talked about, or how one might go about thinning their property.
Yeah, I would have to see a picture of it. I know once she compared it to an aspen, I realized she has a challenge on her hands.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just have to see a picture to answer it any more, in a more refined fashion. But I was going to add too about Sandy's question regarding going about thinning a grove of trees on one's property, because some folks are really kind of do it yourself or interested in it. So I can give some really general guidance about that, because I think you have excellent spacing guidelines from the CAL FIRE website, which is super helpful. So then when you're looking at, all the trees that are there, some of the general things, like what we would call the phenotype. So this is the external characteristics of your tree that you want to look for. Is first thing is color. How does the crown look in regards to color? Does it look like the right shade of green for that given species? If it looks like it's fading or it's yellowing or you're seeing a lot of orange, for a conifer, those are all warning signs. So color is one of the easiest to look at. Another one to look for is just that it's a full crown, as full as you can have. I know sometimes folks just have a lot of trees with a lot of issues, caused from a variety of things, but after everything you've got there, if you can just make sure it's got the best crown that it can for the site, that's helpful. It should also be relatively free of insect and disease. A few bug hits I'm not concerned about, but if you see an active infestation, a lot of bug hits, pitch coming out of a tree, by and large can be seen as something you wouldn't want to retain that tree. So again, if you kind of have the spacing guidelines from the website in your mind, then that kind of helps you parse out in general, what you're looking for. So hopefully that's helpful, and feel free, I can go back and forth as much as you need if you have more questions about that too.
I think that was the gist of the question. Let me look through and see if there's any other unanswered questions. Looks like we basically got through them all.
This is Beth McAllister.
Hi, Beth, go ahead.
Firewise, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as we look at our properties, one of the recommendations from NFPA is to remove those lodgepole saplings. I think a lot of and I guess it's for Danielle, I think it's, possibly is it better to remove those before they become a problem and the tree stands become too dense? They grow everywhere. Those pine cones are, all over the yard, and the lodgepoles, any open space, those trees are coming up.
Yeah, yeah, it's an amazing species in its ability to regenerate. I mean, it's just really something to reckon with. But that being said, yeah, it's always cheaper and easier the smaller they are. And while I've had some landowners say, well, gosh, I wanted them all to grow and the ones that are dominant are going to show themselves, just understand that takes some time and the risk is ever present. And so while you're waiting for trees to show dominance and figure out who's strongest, in all reality, if they're coming up in a clump, they're very genetically closely related. So you don't really have superior genetics in one tree or another. You just need to start spacing out trees or eliminate that grove depending on what's nearby and redistribute that growth onto fewer trees and the trees that you want to retain through time.
Is there kind of a, like, I know Alec Hogg is asking this question, do you have a guideline for what's a healthy stem count? Especially considering, you know, how much warmer the weather is and dry. I know all the trees can't survive, you know, we need to kind of keep the more mature ones so that they can access the water. But is there any kind of guideline?
Yeah, boy, that's the $1 million question statewide, as foresters are really challenged with actually putting a number on stem counts per acre, given a drying climate, and the forecasts are that things are going to get drier. I can give you a couple parameters that I know exist right now, but it's sometimes these are pretty difficult to adapt to individual properties. But in general, when we look at like a forest fire prevention exemption, which is a CAL FIRE exemption, foresters use to thin stands for fuel reduction purposes, we have to demonstrate that we are not retaining any more than 200 trees per acre. Now, the difficulty is the larger the tree, the fewer that you're going to have per acre. So that 200 trees per acre would apply to 3 inches and greater. So trees that are 3 inches and greater. I have still seen that number present itself in what I would consider to be a dangerous fuel arrangement. And keep in mind too, that that parameter speaks to landscape at large. It's not speaking to defensible spacing. So the guidelines, just like John was discussing earlier, the guidelines for defensible spacing are, they stand on their own, and you really want to work on that separation. But if you're able to provide a little bit more information on the average tree size, I could probably get you to a closer stem count for a given area. And by tree size, I mean diameter.
Okay, that would be helpful. We could probably survey just several properties, in Kirkwood and be able to get you that information, because it does seem like a lot of the lodgefuls are the same age and maybe kind of around the same size. So
yeah, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even just a couple pictures, I'm sure I could give you more information.
Okay, that would really be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there was another question from Alec about how can we help red firs thrive? What should we be even watering them to protect? What would you recommend we do for the firs?
So I'm kind of a critic of watering because I believe and I know that, and red fir is one of my most favorite species, but in the end, the tree that you retain or the trees you retain on your property need to be able to exist through time without a lot of pampering, ideally. And there's like red fir, conifer, it's a native species. It grows in pretty tough conditions in and of itself. So it doesn't really, I get worried about people doing a lot of watering because typically we water the upper portion of the soil profile. And what you do is you encourage the rooting to also lift, and it's going to put more roots where the water is instead of really getting down deep in the soil. So if you're not around to water the trees, it's going to be predisposed to kind of like an artificial drought. That makes sense. And it's a challenge to rid red fir of disease. And I think this was one of the questions that was also in the Q&A is, red fir in the area are really affected with Cytospora canker. And so that's an endemic pathogen. It is, it's spread by spores that are in rainwater. And once it's in the overstory, it drips down. It will forever be in the understory. It will affect seedlings that are 2 years old. So unfortunately, it's something that we really can't manage the problem away. To a certain extent, there's some pruning that potentially could work if it's a young tree, but it doesn't mean that neighboring infection isn't going to blow back in with the next storm. So it's a difficult one. Once you're seeing Cytospora in your tree and or mistletoe, those are tough. Usually mistletoe is in a tree for roughly 7 years before it starts to exhibit. And so things are, and otherwise they're systemic. So it's a difficult thing for us to really, get ahead of on the landscape level and even in your yard. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is kind of, we reap what we sow. Honestly, a lot of our cultural practices in the past opened up the canopies, and then it took, that cytospora and the mistletoe from overstory to understory, and now it's just pervasive. It's just really difficult to take care of it and eradicate it.
So we have one more tree question in here. It's a question about fungus. I've been told that dying trees in Kirkwood are a result of fungus. Is this true?
Yeah, so that's just what I was mentioning with cytospora canker. Yeah, it's very true. And mistletoe is another one that exhibits similar, you'll get the long orange branches and parts of branches dying in red fir. And that's more of an obligate parasite. So it doesn't photosynthesize on its own. It sucks the nutrients right out of the tree. So those, again, they're endemic. Unfortunately, they exist at pretty significant levels now. But if you can imagine even having to prune the affected parts out of every tree, it's just not feasible to do that. Sometimes if the trees are small and if in your own yard, you can do that. But be wary of pruning away too much of your tree crowns as well.
So Pamela just sent me a photo of the shrub that she was talking about. So I'm going to share my screen here so you all can see this shrub, since it seemed to be a topic of interest. Okay, wait a second. Can you see? Where did it go? Sorry, you saw an agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
You see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't see the leaf pattern to know what that one is. It does look like it is. It's on a roll. It's definitely capturing that site. Yep. I'm just not sure what that is, or if she had a chance to get an actual close up of the leaf pattern. I could probably get it from that too. Sorry to send you on a wild goose chase, just trying to be helpful.
So that was, I think, the entirety of our questions. If anybody had anything else to add, now would be the time to do it. Well, okay, it looks like we're wrapping it up. So that does it for now. Thanks to all the folks who attended today. And thanks to Danielle and Chief Morgan and Chief Boyce and Catherine Hopkins for all your work that you do and for taking the time to be with us today. We all really appreciate it. It's been really an educational experience, and we'll all take this to heart and go and make some defensible space in our properties. So thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you to Beth and everybody with your fire safe up there. You guys are doing a great job with Firewise and all that. It's been really, really good working with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And the community response has been outstanding. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye.